Good evening, dear students. Welcome to today's session for the auditing and assurance subject. And first of all, the video that you have just watched, please do participate in the virtual international conference, which is specially organized for the CA students, and take full advantage of that initiative, right, by our institute, right? So students, you have done chapter number 1 and chapter number 2. Chapter number 1, you did all the basic concept with respect to definition of auditing, the scope, the aspects of auditing, the inherent limitations, the ISBA code, the ethical requirements or independence. You have covered everything, and I expect that everything is understood and you have started learning also, right? Chapter number 2, you did audit strategy, audit plan, and audit program. And again, for this chapter also, I expect that you have started learning the keywords. Like understanding part should have been clear after you have attended the lectures, but now you should start learning, right? So my emphasis will be on what? Learning after understanding all the concepts. So very good evening to Vivek, Pooja, Shreyansh, Charu, Tanu, Sandeep. Good. So students, now today we'll be starting with chapter number 3, which is audit documentation and audit evidence. So in this chapter, we'll be covering various important concepts like audit documentation, as the name of the chapter is, then audit evidence, then various audit procedures. We'll be discussing in detail about the internal controls, the test of controls, right? Then substantive procedures. And also we'll be discussing 9 standards on auditing, like 9 essays will be covering up in this chapter. So very important chapter for your understanding, right? So as the name of the chapter is audit documentation and audit evidence. So we will first start with audit documentation. And as I always say that I want this session to be very much interactive. So my first question to you, and for which I definitely need answers, quickly tell me, what do you understand by the word documentation? What do you understand? What comes to your mind when I ask you the meaning of term documentation? Send in your replies. Students are saying, ma'am, learning part almost done with understanding. Good. That is very good. So audit documentation. So students, whenever we need to understand a concept, I always tell you that first try to break that into some parts. So our first concept for today and for this chapter is audit documentation. And in order to understand what is meant by audit documentation, let us first break this into audit and documentation. Now audit, what is audit? Now you all have very well understood. And just a quick recap of the definition of the term audit, which is audit is an independent examination of financial information of any entity, whether profit-oriented or not, irrespective of its size or legal form, when such an examination is conducted with a view to expressing an opinion thereon, right? And you should learn this definition as it is, the way it is given. Right. So audit we have understood. And for documentation, let me just have a look at the replies. So Sukanya is saying keeping records of data. Then Harsh is saying maintaining written records. Riya is saying written matter. Tanu is saying in form of writing. And Vedvinda is saying recording of transaction. So I can say documentation is the synonym for the term documentation is what? Record. And if you go after the dictionary meaning, See, documentation is material that provides official information. This is what? This is just the dictionary meaning of the term documentation, right? And the synonym of word documentation is record. So documentation is something which is provide the compilation of certain records that is providing you with the information, right? So now you know what audit is, and now in a very common language you understand that what documentation is. Okay? Now if we have to understand the concept of audit documentation, let me just ask you few questions and then you will see that our definition of audit documentation will be done. Quickly tell me, when an auditor is conducting an audit, what actually he does? When he is conducting an audit of financial statement, what is he doing? What is he performing? By performing something, what is he obtaining? So my first question now is, what does an auditor do when he is conducting an audit of financial statements? So I can say the auditor performs certain procedures. And we have seen in chapter number 1 that I told you in brief that whatever procedures the auditor perform when he is conducting an audit are called what? Audit procedures. So I can write that auditor performs when he is conducting the audit of financial statement. The auditor performs audit procedures, right? Good. Now, when the auditor performs audit procedures, example of audit procedures we have already discussed in chapter number 1 in brief, and today we'll be doing them in detail. So audit procedures can be like inquiry, right? Recalculating depreciation, right? Asking for balance confirmation from the bank or the debtors or the creditors, right? So these are what audit procedures. Okay. After performing the audit procedures, what does auditor obtain? Auditor obtains audit evidence. What is the meaning of evidence? This also we'll be doing in detail in today's chapter. But as of now, try to understand evidence is what? Proof, right? So auditor performs certain audit procedures and he obtains certain proofs, certain audit evidence, right? Now, based on this audit evidence, what does an auditor do? He draws certain conclusions. These are what? Conclusions are what? Based on these conclusions only, he'll be giving his opinion, right? So I can say that auditor performs audit procedures, then he obtains certain audit evidence, and based on these audit evidence, he draws certain conclusions. Now, let us try to understand this with the help of an example. So, I'll take an example of, say, debtors. So, I am the auditor of ABC Limited, right? And I need to check, I need to conduct the audit of what? The debtors. I'm checking the debtors of my client ABC Limited. So, what I'll do, first, it may be possible I'll inquire the management. Then management, please tell me what all debtors you have. Like, please give me a list. Okay? I may ask the debtors to provide me with certain confirmations. As I've told you, external confirmation. I'll ask the debtors. I'll request them that please send in me the confirmation letters as to what is the balance of my client in your books of account, right? So that this is what? External confirmation, for which we'll be studying a separate essay number 505. But as of now, for this example, just understand this, that I as an auditor, I'm checking the debtor balance. And for that, one of the audit procedures that I may perform is to ask the debtors to tell me as to what is the balance of my client ABC Limited in their books, correct? So these are what? Audit procedures. And might be possible I may calculate, I may do certain calculations as to what all sales have been made, what all sales return were there, right? Now, based on these audit procedures, what I'll get? I'll get certain audit evidence. Like how? Suppose when I inquired the management of ABC Limited about the debtor balance, they provided me with, say, ledgers of all the debtors, right? With respect to the confirmation request that I have forwarded to the debtors, I may receive the responses from them, right? So what are all these? These are my audit evidence that I have obtained by performing these audit procedures, right? And let's say after, analyzing everything, after calculating everything, I concluded that the debtor balance are properly accounted for, right? So this is what? This is my conclusion. This is my conclusion. So what is audit documentation? So students, when a record of all these things is maintained, whatever the auditor is performing, everything needs to be recorded. And when you record each and every audit procedure, each and every audit evidence, and your conclusions as an auditor, that record is nothing but audit documentation. So what is audit documentation? Let us just see. So I can say audit documentation is a record of, audit procedures, and audit procedures are always what? Performed, right? So I can say audit documentation is a record of audit procedures performed, relevant audit evidence obtained, and conclusions the auditor reached. So what I'm saying, audit documentation is a record of the audit procedures performed. Who will perform the audit procedure? Auditor, right? Relevant audit evidence obtained. I'm talking about relevant audit evidence. The word relevant here is of great relevance here, right? You will see later on that we need to document only the relevant documents. So the relevant audit evidence obtained and conclusions the auditor reached, right? So where is this definition given? Where are the requirements with respect to audit documentation given? So let us start with the first essay of this chapter, which is essay 230, and the name is very simple: audit documentation. Audit documentation. So students, essay 230, as every essay contains certain responsibility for the auditor while he's performing the audit of what? Historical financial information. Essay 230 contains the responsibility of the auditor. What responsibility? To prepare what? Audit documentation when during the audit of financial statements. Students, if you remember, see, you have done essay 300 in your chapter number 2, right? In essay 300, there is a specific requirement for documentation that when you are applying essay 300, that is when you are planning the audit, you need to document the overall audit strategy, audit plan, and any changes, if any, made to overall audit strategy or plan and the reasons thereof, right? Same way you did essay 320 on materiality in planning and performing an audit. It also says that there is a provision in essay 320 also that the auditor needs to maintain documentation with respect to what? The materiality level, the performance materiality, or any changes, right? So in each and every essay, students, you will find that there is a specific provision with respect to documentation. If the essay is talking about, say, planning, it will have the provisions with respect to documentation of planning, right? Same way, if the essay is on materiality, it will have the provision with respect to documentation related to the materiality part, right? This essay, essay 230, it says that auditor whether you are establishing an overall audit strategy, or you are doing the planning, or you are performing the audit procedures, or you are drawing conclusions, you need to document. You need to document. That is, throughout the conduct of audit of the financial statement, the auditor needs to maintain a documentation of all the papers that he is working on. That is why what I said, working papers. This audit documentation is also known as work papers or working papers. And who will maintain this audit documentation? Who will maintain this? The auditor or the client? Quickly, I need answers. Who will maintain the audit documentation? See, look at the definition. It says it is a record of audit procedures performed. Who is performing the audit procedures? Auditor. The relevant audit evidence obtained. Who is obtaining the audit evidence? Is it the client? No, it is the auditor. And the conclusions. Who is reaching out at the conclusions? The auditor. So who will be maintaining the audit documentation? It is the auditor who is required as per SC 230 to maintain the documentation, to prepare the audit documentation while he's conducting the audit of financial statements of his client. Right? Clear? So we have discussed that SC 230 defines audit documentation. Okay? Now there are a number of concepts which have been defined by SC 230, which we'll be discussing one by one. And students have correctly answered that auditor is required to maintain audit documentation. I've received replies from Shreyan, Sukanya, Hina, Pooja, Charu, Jay, Rafiq, Anita, Yogesh, good. Abhijit and Abhita, good. Okay? So we have understood what is meant by audit documentation, and the definition is very easy to learn if you just logically understand that it is nothing but a record of whatever the auditor is doing. He's performing what audit procedure, he's obtaining what relevant audit evidence, and at last what he is doing, he is drawing the conclusions. So audit documentation is record of audit procedures performed, relevant audit evidence obtained, and conclusions the auditor reached. Now, tell me, what is the objective behind this? See, preparing the audit documentation is a complete task for the audit team, right? They need to maintain, say, a box file or some folder on the, laptop. So it is a complete task. So why an audit team or why the engagement partner will assist, he will emphasize the team that no, you need to maintain audit documentation. Why an engagement team will spend its time and the team to maintain audit documentation? Because the objective of audit documentation is that, first of all, see, when audit documentation is maintained, you have put into file all the working papers related to what audit procedures you are performing, what audit evidence you are obtaining, and what conclusions you are drawing. Tell me, won't it be an evidence as to the audit was planned and performed in accordance with standards on auditing? Tell me. It will help you as an auditor to say that, see, I performed the audit in accordance with all the standards, right? Now, how will you prove it? Will you just remember each and everything after, say, 2 or 3 years that I have done this, I have done that during that audit? No, that is not possible. So you need to maintain everything in writing, and it will help you in establishing that the audit was planned and performed. Audit was planned and performed in accordance with the standards on auditing, right? Also, when a proper audit documentation is maintained, it will give you a basis for what? The auditor's report. Why? Because we now know the definition of audit documentation. It says audit procedures performed based on which audit evidences are obtained, based on which various conclusions are drawn, and based on these conclusions only the auditor will issue his auditor's report. So what is the objective behind preparing a proper audit documentation by the engagement team is it will assist, it will provide a basis that audit was planned and performed in accordance with SS. Why? Because you can very well see from the documentation that, okay, with respect to debtors, all these procedures were performed. With respect to debtors, all these audit evidence were obtained. And with respect to debtors, this conclusion was drawn, right? So it will show that audit was planned and performed in accordance with SA or any other legal or regulatory requirement, right? And secondly, it will provide a basis for what? Auditor's report, right? Students, another related topic. Can I then say that the nature of audit documentation, the nature of audit documentation is that it provides audit evidence with respect to two things. And what are those two things? Nothing but these only. So if I ask you what is the nature of audit evidence, audit documentation, you can always say that it has a nature of providing what? Audit evidence. And what audit evidence? That the audit was planned and performed in accordance with standards on auditing and legal and regulatory requirements. And audit evidence that the conclusions drawn have become the basis of auditor's report, right? And tell me, you have done in essay 200 about overall objectives of an independent auditor, right? So I can also say that it has a nature of providing audit evidence. So first of all, with respect to what? That the audit was planned and performed in accordance with SA. And secondly, I will say that the auditor was able to achieve the overall objective as specified by SA 200. What is the overall objective? To obtain reasonable assurance that financial statements are free from material misstatement. What will happen thereafter? Thereby enabling the auditor to express an opinion that the financial statements are prepared as per applicable FRF, right? So the audit documentation will give an audit evidence that the overall objective of the audit has been achieved. How? You will look at the audit documentation and you will see that, okay, in order to achieve the overall objectives, a reasonable assurance has been obtained by the auditor. And what is the base of that reasonable assurance? The audit procedures, the audit evidence, right? So let us just have a look at these topics from the module, and then you will be able to, you will be able to know how you are supposed to write in your exams. So SC 230, and the name is very simple, that is audit documentation. It deals with the auditor's responsibility to prepare audit documentation for an audit of financial statements, right? The specific documentation requirements of other essays, as I have told you, essay 300, essay 320, they have specific requirement that you need to maintain documentation with respect to, say, if we talk about essay 300, then planning. If we talk about materiality, then essay 320, right? But those requirements do not limit the application of this essay. If something specifically has been mentioned in essay 300, it does not mean that 230 is not applicable. Essay 230 is applicable throughout the conduct of the audit by the auditor. Clear? Now, what is the definition? These are also known as what? Working papers or work papers. And the definition, very important and yes, very simple to learn. But you need to understand, you need to apply the logics. It is a record of what? Audit procedures performed. relevant audit evidence obtained, and the conclusions the auditor reached, right? What is the objective? Why the engagement partner will, deploy his team and the time of the team towards maintaining the audit documentation? But because preparing proper audit documentation will involve time. Why? Because to prepare audit documentation, it will provide what? A sufficient and appropriate record of the basis of auditor's report. We know that the conclusions that we have drawn from what? From audit evidence. And these audit evidence are obtained from where? From performing audit procedures. So it will provide a sufficient and appropriate record of the basis of auditor's report and evidence that audit was planned and performed in accordance with essays and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. So this is the objective of the auditor when he is applying Essay 230. And what is the nature of audit documentation? I told you that it has a nature of providing evidence. Evidence with respect to what? Almost same, these two points. Let us just see. Audit documentation that provides evidence. I'm first reading point number B, that audit was planned and performed in accordance with essay and legal and regulatory requirements. This you have seen. And now point number A, evidence of auditor's basis for conclusion about what? Achievement of overall objective of the auditor. What is the overall objective? To obtain reasonable assurance and to give an appropriate audit opinion, right? So you must have understood what is audit documentation, what are the objectives of the auditor, and what is the nature of audit documentation, whereby we have seen that nature of providing evidence that audit was planned and performed in accordance with essay, and that it provides you an evidence of what? Auditor's basis of conclusion about what? The achievement of overall objectives of the auditor. And where are the overall objectives of the auditor given? It is given under Essay 200, right? So I hope these three topics which forms the foundation of Essay 230 are clear to you people. Let me just have a look at the queries. Right. So far one query is there with respect to what? Whose property is audit documentation. So Vivek, this is, a separate topic under Essay 230 only, which we'll be covering today. So now if I ask you a question, tell me, what is the purpose of audit documentation? What is the purpose? How does it help the auditor? Quickly, I need replies because I want this session to be, very interactive. Jay Gandhi, for your query, you need to, you can send in your query on the email ID. I'll share the email ID in the next session for this purpose. So meanwhile, quickly tell me, what according to you is the purpose that audit documentation will serve for an auditor? So first of all, as we have done twice, let us do this point again, that it helps to plan and perform the audit. See, when I am performing an audit, okay, so what I'll be doing, if me or my team, we are maintaining audit documentation, what we'll be doing, as and when the audit will proceed, we will keep on adding the working papers to a file. Okay? So after having a look at all the work that has been performed till date, let's say I am the engagement partner. So I will be able to plan more effectively for the further audit which is left, right? Let's take another example. Suppose I need to start the audit of this year. And last year also I was the auditor of, say, ABC Limited. So before starting the audit, if I just take up the audit documentation which was maintained last year, and I'll just quickly have a look at what all procedures were performed, what all significant matters were there, I will be in a position to, effectively plan and perform the audit, right? So that is why the first point is what? It helps to plan and perform the audit, right? So I can say it helps the engagement team to plan and perform the audit, right? Then secondly, can I say that it helps to direct, supervise, and review the work of the engagement team? Yes, I can very well say how. See, if I am the engagement partner and me and my team, we are conducting the audit of ABC Limited, I can always call the article assistant and I can always tell them that please show me what all working papers you have maintained. By looking at the working papers, the audit documentation, I'll be able to, direct them or supervise them, or I'll be able to review their work. Okay? And can I hold the article assistant accountable for their work? Yes. How? See, whenever audit documentation is maintained, whenever the papers are put in the working papers are prepared, what happens is, suppose you are working on a sheet, okay? You are inspecting a document. If that document has been checked by you, it has been inspected by you, or any calculations has been done by you, you will be putting your initials, you will be putting the date as to when you have prepared that audit documentation. Now, by looking at the signatures that have been put, the initials or the date, it is very much easy to know as to who has done the work or who is accountable for the work performed. So I can say that 3 points: that it will assist the engagement team to plan and perform the audit. It will help the engagement team for what? Direction, supervision, and review of the work performed. And it will help the engagement team to hold accountable whoever are the team members for their work. So these are the 3 points. Then tell me, will my audit documentation help me in my future audit? If I am going to be, my firm is going to be the auditor of the client organization in the next year also. So I've just given you example that what is the standard practice, that before starting the audit, what we do is we just have a look at the working papers of the last year, right? So it will help us in what? Future audits. And there is a term which is used. It says audit matters of continuing significance. Right? So let us try to understand these words. Then I'll relate everything. Suppose you are conducting the audit of a pharmaceutical company, right? So the pharmaceutical company has a license. Now this license is valid for that company for all the years, right? So suppose you are conducting the audit of this year. You have obtained that copy of the license. You have obtained the memorandum of association, articles of association from the company. Now, these documents, they are of continuing significance for the next year audit also. Why? Because they hold good for the next year also. So, will you ask the client again and again for all the documents? No. You can, take copies from your working papers maintained in the last year of these matters which are of what? Continuing significance. I've given you example of license of a pharmaceutical company, or let's say there is any agreement of the client for, let's say, 5 years, right? So that agreement copy is what? Applicable for the next 5 years. So you can just have a copy of that agreement from your last year audit documentation. So the next point is it helps in future audit. And the next 2 points are related to what? Inspection. So when an audit documentation is maintained, it helps in internal inspection. Now quickly, I have done this topic in detail in chapter number 1. Quickly tell me, where have we discussed this topic? internal inspection. This was one of the elements of quality control. There were 6 points. This was discussed in one of the points of elements of quality control, and I want you people to just quickly send me the reply. So if you remember, we discussed the last point with respect to elements of quality control, which was monitoring, right? And what was mentioned there, that the monitoring can be on a continuous basis, right? Or it can be what? Periodic inspection of selection of completed engagements. So where the audit firm has to see whether the audit work is done as per the policies and procedures of quality control within the firm. So we saw that one of the way is to, select out of the completed engagements and just have a look at the audit documentation maintained, right? So the audit documentation maintained by the engagement team will help in what? Internal inspection. For what? For the purpose of quality controls. And it will also help in external inspection. There is a concept of peer review. So what exactly is this? See, the quality of the audit work is to be maintained, right? Why? Because we are experts. We are giving an expert opinion on the financial statement of our clients. So we need to, maintain the quality up to the standards which have been prescribed by our institute. So yes, the audit firm, they also establish their policies and procedures with respect to quality control, which we have discussed in internal inspection, right? But it might be possible that our institute ICAI may direct one of the CA firms to conduct peer review of the other audit firm. So this is what? The external inspection. The purpose is the same, whether that quality has been maintained or not of the quality work. But now someone externally is inspecting the work of the audit firm. So when a proper audit documentation has been maintained by the audit firm, it will help the firm in getting the external inspection also done by the other audit firm, right? So let us quickly have a look at these points from the module. So what is the purpose? And I told you that first 3 points will help the engagement team. See, engagement team in what? Planning and performing, direction, supervision and review responsibilities, accountable for its work. So these 3 points are what? It will assess the engagement team. Then retaining a record of matters of continuing significance to future audits. I gave you example of license, or you can say agreements which are applicable for the next 5 years. Enabling the conduct of quality control reviews and inspection in accordance with what? SQC 1, Standard of Quality Control 1. And enabling the conduct of external inspections in accordance with applicable legal, regulatory and other requirements. So this is the purpose that an audit documentation will help with the auditor when he's conducting the audit of what? A client, right? Now, next question to you people is, tell me, is there a standard format for maintaining audit documentation? What do you think? Can there be a standard format for maintaining audit documentation? Yes, Tanu is saying, ma'am, audit documentation includes audit program. Yes, Tanu, you are correct, and we'll be doing various examples of audit documentation. Okay? So my question is, can there be a standard format as such for the audit documentation? See, students, when you are conducting the audit of the client organization, see, all organizations, the audit, the internal controls, the audit procedures with respect to a particular organization, all these things vary. right? So as such, you cannot say that there is a standard form, content or extent of audit documentation. But yes, SA 230 has given certain criteria as to how an auditor needs to maintain the audit documentation. So our next topic is about the form, content and extent of audit documentation. Again, where is all this given? SA 230 itself, right? So now first try to understand one thing. See, it says that auditor, otherwise so there will be what? The audit forms, policies and procedures with respect to what? Audit documentation, right? But it says to the auditor that auditor, when you are maintaining the audit documentation, please be careful and make sure that your audit documentation with respect to a particular assignment should be such that any experienced auditor having no previous connection with that client should be able to understand few things about your audit documentation. So this topic, let us just try to first divide this into two parts. So first is, who should be able to understand your audit documentation, and what all about the audit documentation they should be able to understand. Okay? So what I have told you, that as such you cannot say that there is a standard format for maintaining audit documentation, because I've told you that the audit procedures, the audit evidence, the internal controls or the transactions of the clients vary, right? They are different for different clients. Okay? So let's say ABC and Associates is the audit firm who are conducting the audit of MNO Limited. Okay? Now SA 230 says that auditor is who? Let's say CAA is the engagement partner of this. Okay? Of this audit engagement. So SA 230 says, listen CAA, if you want to know about the form, content and extent of audit documentation, do one thing, prepare the audit documentation in such a way that any experienced auditor, let's say CA Z is there. He is what? He has an experience in conducting an audit. He is experienced auditor. He has conducted various audits of other clients, but he is not connected with what? MNO Limited. He is not connected with MNO Limited. But yes, he has an understanding of what? Audit. How the audit procedures are performed, how the audit evidence are obtained, and how the conclusions are drawn. He is aware about that because he is a chartered accountant. He is an experienced auditor, though he is not having any previous connection with MNO Limited. So SA 230 is not saying that auditor maintain an audit documentation in such a way that any person, it is not saying that any person who is not having, whether he is having any knowledge of finance, accounts, audit or not. No. It is saying that an experienced auditor, though he is not having any previous connection with the client, he should be able to understand few things after looking at your documentation. So first of all, tell me, is it clear who should be able to understand few things? It is not saying that anyone should be able to understand or everyone should be able to understand. No. It is saying that an experienced auditor who is already having the experience of conducting an audit, who knows as to how the audit procedures are performed, what audit evidence we generally obtain, right? And how the conclusions are drawn. Though he may not be having any previous connection with this client, right? So it says CAA, maintain your audit documentation of the audit of MNO Limited in such a way that CAZ should be able to understand few things. ठीक है. Now what are those few things? Quickly tell me, is this first part clear, that who should be able to understand the few things? So Khushi is saying it must be understandable, correct Khushi? But it should be understandable to whom? To an experienced auditor who may not be having any previous connection with the client organization. And what should be understandable, now we'll be discussing about that. So quickly tell me, is it clear? ठीक है, students are saying ma'am yes. So the first part is clear as to who should be able to understand. So it says that CAA maintain the audit documentation of your audit of MNO Limited in such a way that CAZ should be able to understand what all things. Quickly tell me what all is maintained in audit documentation. First of all, what? Audit procedures. Right? So it says that CAZ should be able to understand the nature, the timing, and the extent of whatever audit procedures you have performed. So you should not maintain your audit documentation in a, illegible handwriting or in a haphazard way that CAZ is not able to understand this. Maintain it properly, that CAZ is able to understand the nature, timing, and extent of the audit procedures that you have performed. Clear? Secondly, it says that whatever is the result of these audit procedure and then the audit evidence that you have obtained, CAZ should be able to understand that. Very simple. You have now understood the definition of audit documentation and what we are studying, that what should be form, content, and extent. Now we know that audit documentation is what audit procedures perform. So CAZ should be able to understand what audit procedures you have performed. Then we also know that audit documentation include the audit evidence obtained. So CAZ should be able to understand what are the results of the audit procedure and then what audit evidence have been obtained. Clear? And then listen, CAA, maintain your audit documentation in such a way that after looking at your documentation, CAZ should be able to understand any significant matter that you have come across while you were conducting the audit. Plus, if you have applied any professional judgment with respect to that significant matter, then also it should be understandable to CAZ. Now, let us first try to understand this third point. I hope point number 1 and 2 are clear to you people. So let us try to understand this third point. Any significant matter and the professional judgment that you have applied. Just a minute. So, suppose, let's say for an example, some litigation is going against the company. My client is what? MNO Limited. Okay. Now, when I performed, and I is CAA, when CAA performed the audit procedures and obtained the audit evidence, CAA found that the company, CAA applied his professional judgment and he thought that MNO Limited should make a provision with respect to the liability which may arise on account of this litigation, right? However, MNO Limited has shown this as a contingent liability in the books of account and has not prepared what? The provision as thought by CAA. Okay? So what we are saying, what is the significant matter here? The significant matter is that as per the judgment of our auditor CAA, MNO Limited should have made a provision with respect to the litigation that is going against MNO Limited. However, the company has not made the provision, and as per their judgment, as per the management judgment, they have shown it as contingent liability. So SA 230 says CAA, first of all, maintain the audit documentation in such a way that CAZ, who was the experienced auditor having no previous connection, in our case CAZ, he should be able to understand that this is a significant matter which have arisen when you were conducting the audit of MNO Limited, right? And suppose later on, after discussion with the legal department of the company or the external legal counsel of the company, and after applying professional judgment, CA got satisfied that yes, okay, provision as such is not required. It is to be shown as contingent liability only. So that professional judgment which you have applied, any evidence that you have obtained with respect to the significant matter, CAA maintain the documentation with respect to that significant matter and that professional judgment in such a way that after looking at the audit documentation, CAZ should be able to understand that yes, this was a significant matter, and yes, this was the professional judgment which was applied by CAA when he was conducting the audit. So SA 230 is saying that maintain the audit documentation in such a way that an experienced auditor having no previous connection with the client organization, he should be able to understand three things: the nature, timing, extent of audit procedures, the results of the audit procedures and the audit evidence obtained, and the significant matters and the professional judgment which the auditor has applied, right? And then this essay further explains what is meant by nature, timing, extent of audit procedures, and then something about significant matter is also given. Okay? So I hope so far whatever we have discussed is clear to you, and in case of any doubt, please send in your queries. Yes, Tanu is saying, ma'am, this experienced auditor will be different than the auditor who maintains the document. Yes. See, when you are writing something, and say if any student is having a bad handwriting, he understands now. But whether the teacher is able to, understand this, or any other person is able to understand this. So it is not saying that later on you are only able to understand. That is but obvious now. So any experienced auditor having no previous connection, he should be able to understand all these things. What all things? NT of audit procedures, then the audit evidence as the result of those audit procedures, and significant matter and professional judgment, right? So it says that auditor CAA, when you are maintaining the record of NT of audit procedures, now maintain a record of 3 points. So what are those 3 points? It says maintain a record of identifying characteristics. We will discuss these in detail one by one. Identified characteristics of what? Specific items. Suppose you have applied certain audit procedures on related party transactions. This is our example, that you have applied certain audit procedures with respect to related party transaction. So CAZ should be able to understand what is the characteristics of that particular transaction. So mention there that it is a related party. Then who performed the audit procedure and the date, and who reviewed that work along with the date. You need to maintain a record of these also when I am saying that the NTE of audit procedures is to be maintained as a record, right? The NT is nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures. We will be discussing this in detail in this chapter only. As of now, try to understand nature is what kind of audit procedures. Timing is at what time you are performing that audit procedure, and extent is to what extent you are going to check a particular assertion, how many procedures you are going to apply on a particular assertion. So Ria, I hope your query with respect to NTE of audit procedure is clear. So basically ESA 230 is saying that auditor maintain it in such a way that when an experienced auditor having no previous connection with this audit, he is able to understand the NTE of audit procedures. So what all will come, that if any specific items are there, you need to mention the identifying characteristics. I gave you example of related party, who performed the audit procedures and the date, and who reviewed and the date. This should also be, the CAZ should be able to understand all these also, right? And then with respect to significant matters, it says that whenever there is a significant matter and you have had discussions with the team, then please also document the nature of the significant matters. Then when was that matter discussed and with whom was that matter discussed, right? What is the nature? Is it related to any provision? Is it related to what contingent liability, or is it related to some fraud, right? So when was that discussion made, and in the management, in the organization, the client organization, with whom have you discussed that matter? And CAA, if you find any inconsistency, there was an inconsistency in our example now, that I as an auditor or CAA as an auditor was saying that a provision is required to be made, but the management was saying that no, we will show it as a contingent liability. So if any inconsistency is there, please also document as to how the same was addressed, how the same was resolved. So CAA may also document, his discussion with the internal legal counsel of the organization or external legal counsel of the organization, along with his professional judgment. So I hope this is clear. What we have discussed so far is that, first of all, there is no standard form content extent. Okay? The audit firm, ABC and Associates in our case, it may have its policies and procedures as to how the documentation is to be maintained. SA 230 says that auditor shall prepare audit documentation in such a way that it so as to be sufficient to enable an experienced auditor having no previous connection with the audit to understand the nature, timing, extent of audit procedures, the results of the audit procedures and the audit evidence, and the significant matters, if any, along with the professional judgments applied. And in the nature, timing, extent of audit procedures, the identifying characteristics of specific items, who performed the audit procedures, the date of that performance of audit procedures, who reviewed the audit procedures so performed, and the date, right? With respect to significant matters, the auditor has to consider the discussions. He need to document the discussions on the significant matters as to what was the significant matter, what was the nature of that matter, when was the same discussed with the management, and with whom among the management of the client organization was this matter discussed, right? And in case of any inconsistency, how the same was addressed, right? Clear? Now tell me, when I'm talking about the form, content and extent of the audit documentation, there must be various factors which affect the form, content and extent of the audit documentation. So if I say that the size of the organization is very large, there are a number of complex transactions, quickly tell me, will the audit documentation will be more or less? You just need to send in your replies as to more or less. When the size of the organization is large, or you can say a volume of transaction is high and there are complex transactions, tell me whether the audit documentation will be more or less, and how you will be answering this question. Just try to imagine that if I can say more working paper, and then audit documentation will be more, right? So I'll be asking you few questions like this. You need to think like this. that acha, this is the situation. So this situation calls for what? More audit procedures to be performed or more audit evidence to be obtained, thereby resulting in what? More documentation. So for size and complexity, yes, I have already answered, but still Vivek has said more. Anjali, Shivam, Jen, Rohan, Abhijit, Harsh, Charu, Pooja, everyone is saying more. Correct. Tell me, will this be affected by what? Nature of audit procedures? Yes. If I am obtaining external confirmation, my audit documentation will be of that type. If I'm calculating something, my audit documentation will consist of what? The calculations. Now, next question. Tell me, if the risk of material misstatement is high. My next question to you people is, if the risk of material misstatement is high, risk that there may be a material misstatement in the financial statement, whether due to fraud or error, is high. Tell me, will it be more or less? So Sandeep, Shreyans and Goswami, they are saying more. Correct. So higher the risk of material misstatement, obviously you are going to perform more audit procedures in order to obtain more audit evidence, and the audit documentation will be more. Then again, if you identify certain exceptions during the conduct of an audit, if you identify certain exceptions, example, if you identify any fraud, or you see that there are number of related party transactions, all the debtors are related party, tell me, will you perform more audit procedures, thereby resulting in more audit evidence and more documentation, or not? So the answer is yes, right? So one of the factors is about tools and methods. Whatever methods you are going to perform in order to obtain the audit evidence, your documentation, the form, content and extent of the audit documentation will depend upon that method or tool. We will be discussing in detail about these things like flow charts, the narrative records. This then you will be able to understand what tools and methods will be used. Okay? So students are saying yes ma'am, more. If risk is high, more. In the second situation also more. Okay? Now tell me this point. If an audit evidence is very much significant, it is a very strong audit evidence. Suppose you were checking the fixed deposits of an organization and you are being given the original FDs. Tell me, will you obtain other audit evidence also? Or can I say that if the audit evidence obtained is significant enough that it is sufficient and appropriate, then maybe less audit documentation will be required. Why? Because I'm having one audit evidence which is strong enough, which is sufficient in its own, which is sufficient and appropriate in its own. I gave you example of what? Fixed deposits. You are checking the fixed deposits of a client organization and you find that they have provided you with the original FDs itself. So that is a sufficient and appropriate audit evidence and you may not perform other audit procedures. So these are various factors which are discussed in your books. You can just have a look at them and these are very simple. Now then, quickly, now tell me, send me certain examples of audit documentation. So one of the examples, students are saying that, ma'am, if a document, if an audit evidence is strong enough, if it is significant enough to be sufficient and appropriate, then less audit documentation will be required. So there was a query with respect to various examples of audit documentation and one of the students was saying that, ma'am, is audit program and audit documentation? So students, yes. Audit program that you have done in your chapter number 2 is an example of audit documentation. So it has all the details as to what audit procedures you are going to perform, who is going to perform, at what time, like date will be mentioned as to when that audit procedure was performed. So yes, it is an example. So let us just have a look at the various examples that are given. So we have done this topic, form, content and extent, and you will see that the auditor shall prepare audit documentation that is sufficient to enable an experienced auditor having no previous connection, CAZ in our case, and this is what CAA. Okay? So the student who was saying that ma'am CAA is been referred again, no, this is some other auditor who is what, who is having experience but he is not having the connection with the client. With the audit is what, with the client, audit of client. Okay? To understand nature, timing, extent of audit procedures, results of audit procedures and the audit evidence obtained, and significant matters and the professional judgment. Now, if you talk about the nature, timing, extent of audit procedure, what all is to be recorded? The identifying characteristics of specific items. I gave you example of what, related party transactions. If you are performing the audit procedures on specific significant items, then mention the identifying characteristics, who performed the audit work and the date, who reviewed the audit work and the date and extent of such review. Right now, with respect to the significant matters, these 2 points are given. It says the auditor shall document discussions with the significant matters, including the nature, when and with whom the discussions took place. And if any information identified is inconsistent, I gave you example of what, provision and contingent liability, then the auditor shall document as to how the auditor addressed the inconsistency, right? And the next point is what are the factors that affect your audit documentation, which is very simple. You can just have a read at these points. Now, what are the examples? So tell me, can audit documentation be oral? Can it be oral? Can you maintain an oral documentation? No. Okay? So it may be recorded on paper or electronic or other media. You can have the printouts, or it can be in the form of what, soft copies. And yes, audit documentation includes audit program, analysis that you have done, issues, memoranda. What is memoranda? Summary. So summary of various issues that you have identified during the conduct of audit, summaries of significant matters, letter of confirmation. We have discussed the example of what, debtors balance confirmation, and representation. So the auditor may ask the management that, management, please give it to me in writing that the balance of this debtor in your books is correct. It is this much. So what is this? Management representation letter, which we'll be doing a separate essay 580, which is written representation on this. As of now, I try to understand that this is also one of the audit evidence that the auditor may obtain from whom? From the management of the client organization. That please give this thing to me in writing. Okay? And any correspondence, including email IDs. Emails concerning significant matters. Okay? So these are all the example of what, audit documentation. Now, one very important point here is that, tell me, say, if I am calculating depreciation, okay, and then I found that, okay, there is some mistake in this. I was performing one of the audit procedures. Okay? I calculated depreciation. I found that there is some mistake. What I did is, I again calculated. Okay? Then again I found that, okay, there is some mistake. Then I again calculated. Tell me whether I need to maintain a documentation of all these 3 paper, 1, 2 and 3, or only 1 or only 2 or only 3. I was checking the depreciation schedule of the organization, client organization, and I calculated depreciation. Then I thought that, okay, there is some mistake. Then I, calculated it again. Again, I found some mistake, or there was some additions. Management gave me more information. I calculated it again, right? And this is the final one. Tell me, should I include 1, 2, 3, all 3 documents in my audit documentation? quickly send in your replies. What according to you should be included? Write either 1, 2 and 3, or write 1, or write only 2, or write only 3. Okay, so Abhijit is saying only 3. Abhita is also saying only 3. Shreyansh is saying only 3. The correct one, Charu, is saying yes. See, we are not maintaining audit documentation to, in order to confuse someone. Okay? So even we will also get confused in the next year if we will have a look at all these calculations. So it says that if any superseded document is there, what is meant by superseded? Superseded is which has been replaced, which has been removed, or which has been taken place by something else. So you need not maintain, you need not include such document in the audit documentation. Very logical, right? But very important question from your MCQ, like from the point of view your MCQs or your true false. You might get a question as to which of the following is not to be included as a part of audit documentation. A is audit program, B is analysis, C is rough calculations, okay? And D is, let's say, issues memoranda. So the answer is what? C. Because superseded documents which have been removed, which have been replaced, or which have been taken over by some other document. See, we are not maintaining audit documentation to confuse CAZ, right? We are here. In fact, if we include the superseded documentation, this will confuse CAA himself. When he'll look at the audit documentation of the last year, he will himself get confused as to which is the final calculation. So SA 230 says that remove the superseded documents now, don't include them. Okay? So what is the language that has been used? It says the auditor need not include in the audit documentation superseded drafts of working papers. Superseded is what? Removed, which have been taken over, which have been replaced by some other documents, or the financial statement notes that reflect what? Incomplete of preliminary thinking. Previous copies of documents corrected for typographical or other errors, or duplicates of documents. Okay? And you will see that in order to do this, see, when you are conducting the audit, when you are doing the audit procedures, you are maintaining the audit evidence, you are obtaining audit evidence. It might be possible that you are putting each and every paper in the box file. If you have maintained, let's say, a box file or any file for the working papers, it might be possible that you are putting in all the papers, okay? Or the team is putting all the papers. Now, this essay says that with respect to assembly of your audit documentation, with respect to timely preparation of your audit documentation, you may prepare it within certain limit. Okay? Itna to we have understood that superseded drafts are not to be included in the audit documentation, like your preliminary or incomplete thinking, or the documents with typographical errors or any duplicates. Okay? And what is to be included? We have seen audit program, the analysis, the summaries of issues, the summaries of significant matters, or letters of confirmation or representation, or any checklist. What is checklist? See, you may have a checklist as to whether you have received ledger copies, as to whether you have received the balance confirmation, as to, whether this has been done or that has been done with respect to audit. And whatever will be done, you will be putting a tick against that, okay, this has been done. Okay? So checklist, correspondence, all these will form the part of audit documentation, but yes, superseded documents will not come. Okay? Now related to this is a topic with respect to what? Timely preparation of audit documentation. So tell me one thing. After this topic, we will take a break of 10 minutes. So be with me. And before the break, this is the last topic. So students are saying that no ma'am, we will have only the final document, that is that third wala calculation which we were discussing, which is correct. Okay. Now tell me, if I'm conducting the audit of MNO Limited, which situation is better? Situation A, whereby I'm maintaining the audit documentation side by side. Okay. And situation B, whereby I'm doing the calculations, okay, and after completing the audit work, then I compile all the documents related to one client. Which is better situation, putting side by side all the documents relating to one client during the conduct of audit, or after completing the audit work, then putting all the papers in the file related to the client? Tell me, one or two? Which situation will result in an effective audit, which will help in effective review? First or second? First situation में क्या है? The auditor is or the engagement is compiling the document side by side. On the other hand, after the completion of the audit work, the audit documentation has been maintained. So Shreyans, Abhijit and Shivam, they are saying situation 1. Okay? So it says that auditor, चलो CAA से बात करते हैं. CAA was what? The auditor of MNO Limited. So it says, auditor, you need to prepare the audit documentation on timely basis. CAA says why? So SA 230 says that it will enhance the quality of your work. Na? The quality will increase. How? Suppose the engagement team, they are compiling the document side by side. So CAA can very well review their work now, that acha, so far itna work has been done, you have performed this audit procedures good, you have obtained this audit evidence good, right? Perform this audit procedures also with respect to debtor, Hana. He is able to review the work in an effective manner. Okay? So if the audit documentation is prepared on a timely basis, the quality of the audit work is going to increase. Okay? It will help in what? Effective review, and it will be the CAA will be able to draw various conclusions as and when the audit will proceed, right? And can I say that if the audit documentation is maintained after the audit work has been done, it is going to be less accurate, right? Because see, you cannot remember each and every point that you did while you were conducting the audit. So what is better? It is better that you keep on compiling the working papers related to a single client, relating to a particular client when you are, performing the conduct of the audit. Why? Because it will enhance the quality. It will help in effective review of the audit work done. Okay? Now, one more question to you people is, tell me, if I am conducting the audit of say 3 clients at a time, okay, and I put documents related to all 3 clients in one box file or one folder on my desktop, is this situation better? This is situation A. And situation B, whereby I am putting the documents related to a particular client into a folder which is meant specifically for that client. Which situation is better, A or B? Tell me. In first situation, if I'm conducting the audit of 3 clients, I'm putting the documents of all the clients in one file. And then after the completion of audit work, I'll be, sorting out all the papers. On the other hand, what I'm doing, I am maintaining different folders for specific engagement, for specific clients. Which situation is better? So students are saying situation B. Okay? So this concept of maintaining folder or a file for a specific engagement. So when you are maintaining a file for a specific engagement, what is that called? That is called what? Audit file. That is called what? audit file that you are maintaining one or more folder. It can be in electronic form or physical form. Okay? And that folder contains the audit documentation related to what all clients know, related to a specific engagement, relating to only MNO Limited, right? So this is what this is called audit file, right? Now, when I'm saying you need to maintain the papers related to MNO Limited in a specific file, to be called what? Audit file. There is a concept related to assembly of the audit file. See, if you remember, we have read that superseded documents are not to be included. Any document for typographical error, if the same has been removed, you need not include that in the audit documentation. So SA 230 says that, okay, you need to maintain all the papers related to a specific engagement in a particular file. Okay? And do one thing, we give you certain time. SQC 1 is there with respect to what? Quality control. Okay? This we have discussed in detail in chapter number 1. So it says that, see, the purpose for SQC 1 is what? With respect to any engagement, be it audit, review, assurance, the quality is to be maintained. Okay? And we have seen that if the audit documentation is maintained on a timely basis, the quality is going to enhance. Why? Because the engagement partner can very well review and give his suggestion as to, okay, itna work has been done, you may do more work on this. You may perform more audit procedures on that. Okay? And we saw that any documentation which is maintained after the audit has been finalized, chances are there that it is going to be less accurate. Okay? So SQC 1 says that every audit firm, they need to establish the policies and procedures for what? Timely preparation of an audit file. Okay? And SQC 1 has specifically given that after the date of the audit report, once the audit report has been signed, if you need to assemble the audit file, what is meant by assembly? See, it is a mechanical process. That is, suppose you have to give numbers to your documents. You need to remove the duplicate documents. You need to arrange the documents. Assembly, a kind of, administrative kind of work. Administrative work. And if you look at the dictionary meaning of administrative, it is what? Mechanical work. So it says that if an auditor has to assemble an audit file, he can do that administrative work of assembling an audit file. What is administrative? The mechanical works, right? Example, sorting, collating or cross-referencing the documents. Okay? Removing the superseded documents. If that work is left after the date of the audit report, then 60 days more are given. That is not more than 60 days from the date of audit report. So CAA, listen, if you want to assemble your audit file with respect to a specific engagement, you can do that after the date of the audit report. But please, be sure that after the date of the audit report, you and your team will not be performing any new procedures. Any new audit procedures will not be performed by you and your team after the date of audit report. Yes, you can perform any work of administrative nature, that is, which is mechanical in nature, as to sorting, collating, cross-referencing the data or removing any superseded document. But for that also, what time period? Not more than 60 days from the date of the auditor's report, that is when the auditor's report was signed. After that, we understand that in order to assemble the audit file, you will need certain time because you are conducting the audit of several clients. So take 60 days, but be careful, during those 60 days no new audit procedure will be performed by, see, you have already signed the audit report now you cannot perform any audit procedure and come out with a new conclusion. Yes, you can perform the work of what? Administrative kind of work can be performed. Okay? And what all are the examples of administrative kind of work that I'll be discussing from the module after the break. Okay? One more concept. Now CAA says that okay, I'll maintain an audit file with respect to specific engagement, and in order to enhance the quality, I'll maintain it side by side as and when the audit proceeds. Okay? But for the administrative kind of work, that is, if I need to assemble my audit file, that work can be done after the date of the audit report, but not more than 60 days. And now I know that I cannot perform any new audit procedures. But please also tell me, when I have maintained, I have prepared, I have assembled an audit file, what is the retention period? Till when am I supposed to keep this documentation in my office with respect to a particular client? So here again, SQC 1 says that, see, the audit firm will establish the policies and procedures for the retention of the audit documentation. But yes, according to me, SQC 1 says that the audit documentation, the audit file with respect to a particular client, it needs to be maintained and retained till the end of the retention period. And what is that? It shall be no shorter than 7 years. 7 years from the date of audit report. So SQC 1 says that you need to keep the audit documentation, the audit file with respect to a specific engagement for a period which is no shorter than 7 years from the date of the audit report. That is the date when you sign the audit report. After that, at least for 7 years, you need to retain the audit documentation with respect to the client. Okay? So what we have done, I'll quickly summarize with respect to this audit file, and then after the break we will just go through the module. Okay? So we saw that the audit documentation should be maintained on timely basis. Why? Because it will enhance the quality. It will lead to effective review by the engagement team, the engagement partner, and it will help in, forming the conclusions on the timely basis. Okay? And chances are there that if you maintain the audit documentation after the audit work has been completed, it is going to be what? Less accurate. Okay? Now, I asked you a question that, can I keep the documents related to all the clients in one file? No. An audit file. What is an audit file? It is one or more folders or other storage media. It can be in physical form or electronic form, and it consists of audit documentation of a specific engagement. Okay? Now, is there any time limit for preparing that audit file? Yes, first of all, the general rule is what? It should be prepared on a timely basis, side by side kar lo. But if there is any administrative work to be done, then SQC 1 says that with respect to the assembly of the audit file, only administrative work can be done after the date of the auditor's report, and that too not more than 60 days from the date of the auditor's report. What kind of administrative work can be done? We have seen that sorting the data, collating, arranging the data, or deleting any superseded documents, all those can be done. Okay? Then the auditor asks that, is there any retention period also for the audit file? SQC 10 minutes, and then I'll take you through the module whereby we'll be reading these concepts relating to audit files. So right now it is 7:31. So at sharp 7:41 we will meet. Okay? So we will break here. Okay. So students, I hope you all are back after the short break, right? So we were discussing about audit file and audit documentation, timely preparation. So let us just have a look at the same from the module. And please students also send in your replies as to whether you are, understanding the concept or not. So timely preparation of audit documentation, we saw that it should be on a timely basis. Why? Because it will enhance the quality of the audit and facilitate effective review and evaluation. Further, documentation prepared after the audit work has been performed is likely to be what? Less accurate than documentation prepared at the time such work is performed. Okay? Then audit file, one or more folders or other storage media. In physical, you may have the box files or electronic form or any folders on your systems, computers, containing record that compromise audit documentation of all clients know for a specific engagement. See why all these provisions are there? Because if you remember, when we started discussing form, content and extent of audit documentation, we said that CAA should prepare audit documentation with respect to audit of MNO Limited in such a way that CAZ, that is what? An experienced auditor having no previous connection with this client, he should be able to understand various things. So if the documents are maintained in a haphazard way, CAZ won't be able to understand. In fact, CAA won't be able to understand later on. Okay? So that is why with respect to a specific engagement in a particular file. Assembly of audit files, so it says that it should be first of all on what? Timely basis. SQC1, what is the name? Quality control for firms that perform, and if you remember, we did this in first chapter, that with respect to all the engagement standards, be it related to audit, be it related to review, be it related to assurance or related services, and the standard on quality control will be applicable. So quality control for firms that perform audit and review of historical financial information and other assurance and related service. So what is the name? We have seen it requires the firm to establish policies and procedure for timely completion. Okay? And what is the time limit that has been given in SQC1 within which the company to complete the assembly of final audit 5 is ordinarily not more than 60 days after what? After the date of the auditor's report. And during these 60 days also, can a new procedure be performed? No, only work of what? Administrative. What is meant by administrative? It means what? Mechanical. Admin department hota hai na company mein. Mechanical work can be done like what? We will just see. The completion of assembly of final audit file after date of auditor's report is what? Administrative process that does not involve the performance of new audit procedures and drawing new conclusions. Very, very important. MCQ, case scenario, true, false. Okay? Changes may, however, be made in the audit documentation during the final assembly process if they are what? Administrative in nature. So if I give you true, false, that whether new procedures can be performed while assembling the audit file after the date of the audit report, the answer will be no, it cannot be performed. So what are those changes? These are also very important. Deleting or discarding what? Superseded documentation. And now you all know what is meant by superseding. Sorting. What is sorting? Quickly tell me what is sorting. Sorting is arranging systematically. Arranging systematically. What is collating? It means collecting. Collecting from whom? Let's say there is a team of 4 persons. So the papers are, with the team members. So you are collecting the papers from them. Cross-referencing working papers. You are putting the numbers. Okay? Signing off the completion checklist relating to final assembly process. You are maybe some initials are left, okay? Or the checklist you need to put in the text as to whether all these things have been done or not. So you may do that. Documenting audit evidence that the auditor has obtained, whatever audit evidences have already been obtained. See, these have already been obtained and these have already been discussed and agreed with the relevant team members of the engagement team before the date of auditor's report. So you are not obtaining any new audit evidence. You have already obtained, discussed and agreed with the relevant team members, and now you are just putting that evidence in the file. What about retention period? So after the assembly of the final audit file, the auditor shall not delete or discard documentation of any nature. Any nature you will not delete before the end of its retention period. And again, SQC 1 says that the firms are required to establish policies and procedures for retention of engagement document. Otherwise, what is given in SQC 1? The retention period for audit document engagements ordinarily is no shorter than 7 years from the date of auditor's report or the group auditor's report. So what is group auditor's report? Suppose the audit of branches has been done by some other auditor. So as a group, if a report has been given, so whatever is the date of that report, 7 years from the date of the group auditor's report, at least 7 years, the documentation will be maintained. So is it clear? I could see a point, a query which is common. 2-3 students have asked me. Let me just take you through that point. Let me just take you through that point. So, see, it says this paragraph. We were discussing about what audit documentation, that what all is to be included in audit documentation. So what are the examples we discussed? And then we saw that superseded documents are not to be included. Okay? Now, one point is there that the auditor may include copies of entities' records as part of the audit documentation. Just a minute. That just have a read at this point. Just quickly read this point. This. Okay. So the auditor may include copy of entities records, for example, significant and specific contracts and agreements. This we have already seen, that in case any document of continuing significance is there, like contract or agreement, they can be kept as a part of audit documentation. Okay? The audit documentation is not a substitute for the entity's accounting record. See, when I as an auditor am conducting the audit of an organization, what I'll do is I'll ask the management to provide me with the copies of the financial statement. I'll ask them to provide me with the ledgers. Okay? Now, let's say if the management is going before the income tax authority and the income tax authority asks the management to provide with the entities records. So the management cannot say that my auditor is having the audit documentation, you may consider that. Why? Because the entities record, the originals are with the management. Now, I as an auditor, I am keeping only the copies of such financial statement in my audit documentation. So my audit documentation is not a substitute for the entity's financial statement. Wherever, say, if MCA requires, the registrar requires the financial statements of the organization, then financial statements will be presented, not my audit documentation. Why? Because my audit documentation, the audit documentation of the auditor is the property of the auditor. I have worked upon it and I have only taken the photocopies of the financial statement. So the management cannot use my audit documentation as a substitute of the entity's accounting record, and vice versa also. I cannot just keep the entity's record in my audit documentation. I'll say that documentation is complete. No. I need to put the various audit procedures. As an auditor, I need to put the various audit evidence and the conclusions that I am drawing based on those audit procedures performed. ठीक है? So I hope ये किसका query था? Riya, Vivek, I hope your queries are resolved. And one more student was there. ठीक है? I hope Riya and Vivek, I can see your names. So please send in your replies whether this query is clear or not. Charu was also asking this. ठीक है? Charu, Vivek, Riya, is your doubt clear? And Pooja is saying, ma'am, please 60 days wala concept, please again say explain again. So it is saying that, ठीक है, first of all, what is the law? That you need to maintain the documentation side by side on a timely basis. Why? Because it will enhance the quality. Okay. But SQC 1 says that we understand that in order to assemble the audit file, thoda bahut administrative kind of work is left कि आपको proper duplicates delete करने हैं, या you need to collect the data, collect all the working papers from your team. You need to arrange an assembly file with respect to particular audit engagement. So we give you some extra time that after the date of the audit report has been signed. ठीक है? उसके बाद भी आप थोड़ा बहुत काम कर सकते हो. But you will not perform any new audit procedure. Why? Because audit report has been finalized ना. हाँ, administrative kind of work can be done. ठीक है? But उसके लिए भी we are giving you what? 60 days, not more than 60 days from the date of the auditor's report. You should have completed the assembly of your audit file within 60 days from the date of the audit report. And that too, within these 60 days, only administrative kind of work should be done. No new audit procedures. And you need to maintain this for a period of no shorter than 7 years from the date of the auditor's report. ठीक है? Pooja, is it clear? Khushi, Vivek, Charu are saying their doubt is clear. Pooja, you also tell me whether your 60 days wala concept is clear or not. ठीक है? So, this is clear now. Now, the next, a very simple concept that we have already seen, we have already discussed. It says that in case of a significant matter, see, just try to understand one thing. Let's see, when I am saying that I need to document what we saw, audit procedure, audit evidence, and we saw significant matters. Okay? And we also saw that any professional judgment that we as an auditor are applying. See, professional judgment of an auditor will be used again and again during the conduct of an audit. Okay? So unless and until you will document that, how will, in our example, CA-Z, how will he be able to know what professional judgment CA-A has applied? So that is why the auditor needs to document statement through understanding the entity and its environment. So significant matter, if you identify any risk of material misstatement, then this becomes a significant matter. Na? If you revise such assessment, this again is a significant matter. Okay? Or let's say if the auditor is unable to apply any audit procedure, he is unable to perform any audit procedure. Let's say, for example, the auditor wants to obtain confirmation from the debtors with respect to the balance of his client in the books of the debtors, but he is not getting the addresses from the management. So he is unable to apply an audit procedure. Na? This audit procedure is mentioned where? In SA 505, external confirmation, and the auditor is unable to perform that. So these are all what? These are all examples of significant matters. What can be example of professional judgment? I gave you example of what? Provision versus contingent liability. Or a very simple and very common example can be accounting estimates. The management have made an accounting estimate, say with respect to your provision for debtors, doubtful debts. Now, why 5%? Why not 6%? Why not 10%? Auditor management applied its judgment, right, when it is calculating the provision. In order to check that, auditor will apply his professional judgment. So how will CAZ know about the professional judgment? Document it now. So the documentation of significant matters and professional judgment will be required. And the various examples that I have just given, these are mentioned in your book. You can just have a quick read at this as your homework. Okay? Now, one more provision, a very interesting provision and a very important question from the point of view of your write short notes or maybe descriptive question. Okay? I have just told you about the meaning of term memorandum. If anyone remembers, please send in your replies. Quickly send me what is meant by memorandum. This will help me in seeing whether you are attentive in the class or not. Whiteboard is not visible. I'll just share it again. I hope students it is clear now. Astha, tell me, Shivam, Ro. So, what I have written is what's about significant matters and professional judgments, and these examples are given in your module. You can just have a look at these. So what is completion memorandum or audit documentation summary? So students like Rohan, Pooja, Anchal, they are very attentive. They have said, ma'am, it is summary. Correct. So what is meant by, what is the dictionary meaning of memorandum? It is what? Summary. Okay. Now tell me, when I'm saying that my audit documentation will help me in future audit also. I told you that it is a general practice that you refer to the old audit documentation like of the previous years when you conducted the audit. Okay. Now tell me, there is, let's say, a complete box file consisting of a number of working papers. When I'm looking at the working papers, it might be possible now that any important significant matter is overlooked. I may not pay attention. Okay. I just turn the page without looking at the matter and without having a look at the matter that it was a significant matter. So there is a very simple solution to this, which is given by SA 230. It says, do one thing now. जितने भी significant matters हैं ना, उनका prepare a summary. अलग से नहीं बनाना है. This is a part of audit documentation itself. Entire audit documentation का you are preparing a summary of the significant matters, ठीक है, and how they were what addressed. We have already discussed our example of provision versus contingent liability. What was the significant matter? What was the nature? When did you discuss with whom and how the same was addressed? Okay. Maintain what? A summary, which is called what? Completion memorandum or audit documentation summary. What will be the benefits of such summary? It will help in what? Effective and efficient review. If someone is reviewing my audit documentation, he or she can have a look at the summary quickly and will not overlook any of the significant matters. Okay? It will help in internal inspection or external inspection also. External inspection, we have seen. Internal as per SQC1, right? Peer review, I gave you example for external inspection. And specifically in case of large and complex audit, this is of great help. Why? Because the number of documents, the number of volumes are more, so the number of audit procedures performed are more, so the documentation is a bulky file. So in case of these, maintain a documentation summary, audit documentation summary, also known as what? Completion memorandum, having a summary of all the significant matters and how the same were addressed. Okay? Simple concept, but yes, very important. You can have a direct question as to what is completion memorandum, what is audit documentation summary. Okay? Now there was a doubt, ma'am, whose property is audit documentation? Whose property is audit documentation? Well, basically, just a minute. So I can just a minute. So ownership of audit documentation. Quickly tell me two options. I'm giving you two options. First is auditor and second is client. Quickly, just write client or auditor. Asta, yes, they are same. And quick, who is saying? Rohan, about emphasis of matter paragraph, we'll be discussing this in detail in chapter number 11. As of now, try to understand this is a kind of modification in the report, auditor's report. Okay? The auditor wants to emphasize on certain matter, so he may include an emphasis of matter paragraph. Okay? Now, ownership, students are saying, Anchal, Jamil, Charu, they are saying it is auditor's property. See, I as an auditor, I am performing the audit procedures. I am obtaining audit evidence. I am drawing certain conclusions, and I am, maintaining the audit documentation. Okay? So whose property is audit documentation? The auditors. Okay? If you remember, we have done confidentiality clause in chapter number 1. So auditor will maintain a confidentiality with respect to the information obtained as a result of what? Business or professional relationship with the client. So auditor needs to maintain a confidentiality of the audit paper, and these are the property of the auditor unless otherwise required by law. Unless otherwise required by law, what does it mean? There is a section 143 subsection 12 of the Companies Act, which says that in case of fraud in a company which the auditor has found, he needs to report it to the central government, and a threshold, a limit has been specified as to if the fraud exceeds so and so amount, you need to report it to the central government. Now, if the central government then asks that please give me your audit documentation, what will auditors say? No, I will not give. Confidentiality is to be maintained. No. So if it is required by law, auditor will. So the line says unless otherwise required by law, it is the property of the auditor. Now tell me, if the client asks the auditor that auditor, please share some of the part of your audit documentation, can the auditor do that? Will the confidentiality clause be hampered in this case? Tell me. When the auditor is showing the audit documentation with respect to the client itself, so the rule of confidentiality is not hampered here. Why? Because these documents, the working is with respect to what? The client itself. Now, so I am showing the papers to the client only. But yes, SQC 1 says it is your discretion. It is your mercy whether you want to show it to the client or not. What is discretion? At auditor's will. अगर आपकी इच्छा है तो आप दिखा दो उनको documents. Otherwise, you are not mandatorily required. So the auditor may, at his own discretion, make portions or extracts from audit documentation available to the client. ठीक है, but auditor, it should not undermine the effectiveness of your work. It should not undermine the effectiveness of your work. What is meant by undermine? It should not make your work weaken. See, what is meant by undermine? Just significant matters we have done, completion, ownership. It should not undermine. Undermine is what? Dictionary meaning is to make something weaker. To make something weaker. Okay. So let's say if I have maintained an audit program whereby I have mentioned that I'll be conducting the surprise check of cash or inventory, surprise check of investments or cash on so and so date, and I show that to the management. Will my audit be that effective? No. Why? Because now the management knows that surprise check is going to be conducted on this date. So the element of surprise will not be valid now. So if you want to show, you can show it at your discretion. आपकी मर्जी है. At your discretion, the auditor may at his discretion make portions or extracts from the audit documentation available, provided such disclosure does not undermine the validity of the work performed. Clear? Yes, it depends upon the will. ठीक है. So I hope the topics so far that we have covered in essay 230 are all clear. I'll just quickly recapitulate all the topics so as to bring the entire essay 230 together. ठीक है. Very easy and very important. So we started with the definition of audit documentation, whereby we understood that essay 230 deals with the auditor's responsibility to prepare audit documentation for an audit of financial statements. And now we know that if specific requirements in other essays are also given, they do not limit the application of essay 230. Okay? Why? Because those essays talk about the particular work that has been performed, documentation of the particular work that has been performed in those essays. Essay 230 says for an audit of financial statement, that is पूरे audit के लिए, just a minute, for an audit. Okay? And what is the documentation? Record of audit procedures performed, relevant audit evidence obtained, and conclusions the auditor reached. It is very easy to learn. Just remember it logically. कि auditor पहले क्या करेगा? He'll perform audit procedures. फिर उसके बाद he'll obtain audit evidence. He'll draw certain conclusions. A record of all will form audit documentation, also known as working papers or work papers. What is the objective? Objective and nature are kind of same. So what is the objective? It provides that a sufficient and appropriate record of what? Basis of auditor's report and evidence that the audit was planned and performed in accordance with SA and legal and regulatory requirements. What is the nature? Nature of providing evidence with respect to these 2 points only. Purpose, how to learn, I told you 3 points are related to what? Assisting the engagement team in what? First, to plan and perform. Second, to direct, supervise and review. And third, to hold accountable, to be accountable for its work. Then it acts as a matter of record of matters of continuing significance to future audits. I gave you example of license in case of a pharmaceutical company or agreements or contracts. Okay? Then next 2 points are related to what? Inspection. First is what? Internal inspection, your STC 1. And then is external. I gave you example of what? Peer review. ठीक है. ठीक है. उसके बाद form, content and extent पे we saw that the auditor shall prepare documentation such that it is sufficient to enable an experienced auditor having no previous connection with the audit, with any audit, no, with that particular client, to understand what? The nature, timing, extent of audit procedures. और इसमें क्या क्या था? The identifying characteristics of specific items, when and by whom the audit procedures were performed, and who reviewed the date and extent of such review. Then was audit evidence as a result of audit procedure and significant matters and the professional judgment. Significant matters में what all will you document? The discussions. Nature, when, with whom discussions take place, and if any inconsistent information is identified, then how the same was addressed. Otherwise, it depends upon factors like size, complexity, nature of audit procedures performed, identified risk of material statement, and various other factors. What are the examples we saw? It can be on paper or electronic or other media. Audit programs, analysis, memoranda is what? Your summaries, letter of confirmation, representation, checklist, correspondence. But yes, it is not a substitute for entities accounting record. ठीक है, some of the copies of entities records like your agreements, your contracts, they can be part of audit documentation. And yes, your audit documentation will not include superseded drafts or working paper. We are not making audit documentation to confuse someone, है ना? We are making it in order to make it easier for the reviewer to review. ठीक है? So incomplete preliminary thinking, previous copies of documents or duplicates, these are not to be included. टाइमली प्रिपरेशन में भी सो टाइमली प्रिपरेशन होना चाहिए. व्हाई? बिकॉज उससे क्वालिटी एनहांस होगा, इफेक्टिव रिव्यू होगा एंड कंक्लूजन्स में इट विल असिस्ट. एंड what if you prepare the documentation after the audit work has been completed, it is likely to be less accurate. So how to maintain it? All the clients in one file? No. One or more folders or other storage media in physical electronic form containing record that comprise the audit documentation for a what? Specific engagement. Very, very important. And is there any time limit? Yes. SQC 1 says do it on timely basis now. ठीक है, but 60 days time has been given after the date of the audit file for what? Of audit report for what? For assembly of the audit file, for the administrative kind of work, no new procedures. ठीक है, so all these changes can be made. And till when to retain? 7 years from the date of the auditor's report. ठीक है, this we have seen. I gave you these examples. We have discussed these very well in detail. You can just have a read at this example of what? Significant matters and professional judgment. What is completion memorandum? It is helpful. Auditor may consider it helpful to prepare and retain as a part of audit documentation a summary, also known as what? Completion memorandum, which describes significant matters identified during the audit and how they were addressed. How will it help? It may facilitate effective and efficient review and inspection, and particularly for what? Large and complex audits. And then ownership, SQC 1 says that unless otherwise specified by law or regulation, I gave you example of fraud, section 143, subsection 12. Audit documentation is the property of the auditor. He may at his discretion make portions of or extracts from audit documentation available to the clients. So whatever he feels that कितना documentation show करना है, a part or a major part, that is upon whose discretion? Auditors. ठीक है, provided such disclosure does not undermine the validity of the work performed, and in case of assurance, the independence of the auditor or his persona. ठीक है, ठीक है. So tell me, अच्छा, there is a doubt. Charu is saying, ma'am, license may be cancelled, then we have to check every year. Huh? Charu, if anything like this happens, so auditor is always, alert all the time. Na? So if I gave you example of this example where here in matters of continuing significance. ठीक है? In fact, see this point. Now, I gave you example of license of a pharmaceutical company, and Charu is saying, ma'am, if license gets cancelled, so be alert, apply professional skepticism. Na, why license has been cancelled? ठीक है? So auditor will perform other audit procedures. ठीक है? Okay, Charu. So please tell me whether you have understood so far. Like, we have completed audit documentation and the first essay of this chapter, which is essay 230, audit documentation. ठीक है? ठीक है, understanding is required, but learning is also very, 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 very important. I want you people to learn the keywords, the definitions, and use technical words. Professional, you are giving a professional examination, Hana. A lot out of you people is expected. So you need to give what? You need to learn, but learn after understanding. So I hope so far is clear. We will be discussing the concept of audit evidence today. But before that, I just want to know whether everything is clear or not with respect to audit documentation. ठीक है, Pooja, your query with respect to how much documentation can be shown, I hope it is clear, because I've said that it depends upon what? Auditor's discretion. ठीक है. So now what is audit evidence? So again, as I always say, that when you have to understand a concept, so what is our new concept here? So now we are discussing about what? We are discussing about audit evidence. So audit, you all know. What is evidence? Tell me, what is the meaning of term evidence? We have seen that auditor, while conducting an audit, he'll perform audit procedures. Based on these audit procedures performed, he will obtain certain audit evidence, and based on these audit evidence, he is going to give certain conclusions. So what is evidence? Tell me the meaning of the term evidence. The first word or the phrase that comes to your mind when I say evidence. Quickly tell me. Quickly tell me, what do you understand by the term evidence? Don't say what I am writing on the board. So, what is audit evidence? Why am I not getting the replies? Students, I have got at least 20-30 replies. All came together. So everyone is saying proof. Saurav is saying something supported by something. ठीक है. So Sushil, Goswami, Jay, everyone is saying proof. ठीक है. So see, when we as an auditor, we are giving an expert opinion on the financial statements. ठीक है. So see, students, auditing is a very logical process. ठीक है. When we are conducting the audit of the financial statements, on the face of it, financial statement may look good, but what is the actual situation? The auditor has to see that. That is not possible unless and until auditor does an objective examination, unbiased examination of the financial statement. ठीक है. After conducting an unbiased examination, then only the auditor is able to give an opinion on the financial statement. And students, since we are giving an expert opinion on our opinion, that opinion has been used by a number of users like the shareholders, the bankers, the debtors, the creditors. So unless and until I have a proof, I cannot say that the financial statement reflect a true and fair view, or I cannot say that the financial statement do not reflect a true and fair view. I need to have certain proof, or I can say I need to have audit evidence. And what kind of audit evidence? The audit evidence on which I as an auditor am going to base my opinion, it should be what? That opinion should, that evidence, that should be sufficient and appropriate. In your entire chapter number 3, you will see the prefix, the words that are used before the term audit evidence is what? Sufficient and appropriate. The auditor needs to base his audit opinion on the audit evidence, and that audit evidence needs to be sufficient and appropriate. Where is all this mentioned? In SA. So the second essay of this chapter, 500, and the name is very simple, audit evidence. So we did essay 230 on audit documentation, and with respect to audit evidence is what? Essay 500. And we have seen that we as an auditor, we cannot give our opinion without any proof. We need to have an audit evidence, and that too sufficient and appropriate. Correct? ठीक है. Now, what is audit evidence? We have seen the meaning of audit and evidence. Now, let us try to understand what is the meaning that has been given by SA 500. So, first of all, SA 500, the way we studied for SA 230, audit documentation, that it contains the responsibility for the auditor to prepare the documentation in the audit of financial statement. So SA 500, what does SA 500 explain? So first of all, SA 500 explain as to what constitutes an audit evidence. Audit evidence hota kya hai? This is contained where the provisions are contained in SA 500. Then it deals with auditor's responsibility to do what? To design and perform the audit procedures so that he can obtain the audit evidence, and so that on the base of these audit evidence, he can draw a conclusion and give a report. Very logical what I'm saying. First of all, it explains as to what constitutes audit evidence. ठीक है, simple. Then it deals with the auditor's responsibility to do what? First of all, what? To design and perform what? Audit procedures. Why? See, our main focus in this essay is on what? Audit evidence. So why the auditor will perform audit procedures? To obtain, and now you all know audit evidence should be what? Sufficient and appropriate. What is meant by sufficient and appropriate? I'll be discussing this in detail in our next lecture. But as of now, try to understand sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. Okay. Why to need this? Because he need to draw certain conclusions. Why? Because he need to give his opinion. Clear? So SA 500 explains as to what constitutes an audit evidence. Okay? And secondly, it deals with the auditor's responsibility to design and perform the audit procedures. Why? To obtain the sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Why? In order to draw conclusions. Why? In order to give an opinion. So what is the definition of SA of evidence? Let's have a look at it from your module. So SA 500 audit evidence, it explains what constitutes audit evidence in an audit of financial statement and deals with what? Auditor's responsibility. You will see that every essay contains the responsibility of the auditor with respect to the matter with which that essay deals, right? So this essay deals with what? Audit evidence. So what is the auditor's responsibility? See, in order to obtain the audit evidence, the auditor will have to design and perform audit procedures. So to design and perform audit procedures, why? Because he needs to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Again, why? Because he needs to draw reasonable conclusion. Why? Because he needs to base his auditor's opinion on those conclusions. So what is the definition of audit evidence? Let us just have a look. So it is the information used by the auditor, ठीक है, in arriving at the conclusion on which opinion is based. Tell me, this definition is what? This only? That it is the information to be used by the auditor. Why? Because he need to draw certain conclusions. Why? Because he need to give his opinion. ठीक है? Yes, Tanu, you are correct. Sufficiency means quantity and appropriateness means quality. That the audit evidence should be sufficient. Sufficient means what? Quantity should be right. And appropriate means the quality should be right. And in detail, in next chapter, we'll discuss. Okay? So audit evidence is what? Information used by the auditor in arriving at the conclusions on which the auditor's opinion is based. Right? Now, what kind of information? What kind of information? So, We have understood the definition. The information to be used by the auditor. Why? In arriving at the conclusions on which he'll base his opinion. Okay? Now, information, try to understand the keyword information here. Now, what information? Are the financial statements being used by the auditor? Yes. Are the invoices, contract copies being used by the auditor? Yes. Are the ledgers, do they form part of the information? Yes. The entries, journal entries? Yes. So first of all, information includes the information contained in the accounting records, right? Your ledgers, your entries, your invoices, your contract copies, everything. Okay? Then information consists of other information also. Let's say auditor has with him minutes of the meeting, board meeting. Is that a part of accounting record? No. But is that a useful information? Yes. Because this information will tell the auditor that if any resolution has been passed, whether it has been correctly passed or not, right? Whether it is as per the Companies Act or not, right? Same way, if I say that any written confirmation has been obtained from debtor or creditor, tell me, is it a part of accounting record? No. But is it a part of other information that is useful? Yes. Because based on this, the auditor will conclude whether the debtor's balance or the creditor's balance is going to match or not. And based on this conclusion, the auditor is going to give his opinion. Same way, if there are certain manuals which have the details as to how the internal control works. So, is this a part of accounting record? No. But will the auditor use it when he's conducting an audit, when he's checking the internal control? Yes. Right? So the definition says information to be used by the auditor in arriving at the conclusion on which the auditor's opinion is based. And now we have understood what is meant by information. Information consists of two parts here as per SA 500. First is what the information contained in accounting records, like our general entries, our ledgers, our invoices, the contract copies, right? The cost, the worksheets, the calculations, right? Then other information that authenticates the accounting records and that help the auditor to, to have a reasonable assurance that financial statement reflect a true and fair view. Examples can be what? Any minutes of the meetings or any manuals containing how the internal controls will work or any confirmation from the debtors or the creditors of the organization. So we have just got a little idea about what audit evidence is. In the next class, we'll be covering with this topic, audit evidence, and we will understand about various tests of the internal controls that auditor will perform, the various substantive procedures, your favorite query as to ma'am, what is nature, timing, extent of audit procedures, what all audit procedures auditor can perform, and the other essays. Okay? So with this, I'll end this session for today. But before ending this session, I want you people to again send in your replies as to whether you have understood or not. And please, I'll repeat it again that understanding is important, but learning is also very, very important. So please learn as and when you're proceeding with the chapters. Don't compile that, okay, I've understood, I'll learn it later. No, that won't be possible. Keep on learning side by side. Okay? So timely learning should also be done, and I hope everything is clear to you. In case of any query, please send in your queries to me. Okay? So see you in the next session. Thank you for a patient listening and good night. Please reply as to whether you have understood or not, right? Okay, thank you. Bye.